Hello and welcome back once more to Stumbling to Eternity, the podcast where we share stories of faith, joy and all of the mess in between that comes as we walk with Jesus. My name is Rhiannon and today I'm joined by Luke Wilder, who is a student studying chemistry at Southampton Uni. If you're the kind of person who depends on logic and reasoning, then I really hope that his story will inspire and equip you to explore faith and go deeper with Jesus as we discuss wrestling with so many questions and how Jesus can be the rock amongst all the uncertainty. Enjoy. Luke Wilder, hello.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
It's good to see you.
How are you doing?
I am calm. I'm hoping that this time will bring about glory for God, and I hope that my story and the conversations we have will help people. So I'm very pleased about that as well.
That was such a deep answer, How are you doing?
It's going to be a deep time.
I love it. I'm excited.
Time.
Awesome. Okay, well, tell me a bit about who you are and how we know each other.
Yeah. So I'm a second year student studying chemistry at the University of Southampton. I don't know how we knew each other. We met last year, probably through the Christian Union in Southampton.
Yeah, I don't remember the first time I met
Events week
you.
or something like that.
Oh yeah, no, I do remember. It was during Events week and Lucy took you out for a prayer walk.
That's right.
And
Yes.
I just bumped into you on campus and you were
Yeah.
like, something awesome just happened. Like Lucy had a prophetic word for somebody and it was amazing and I can't wait to give you fruit of the Spirit.
Oh, great. Cool.
I remember that.
Crikey, wow, I was quite the jubilant little boy. And then I suppose just both of our involvement within Highfield Church and within the CU has brought us together, and well, here we are now.
Yeah.
So yeah,
you were basically in the church building nearly every day.
that is accurate. Yeah,
In our cafe.
So, yeah, great space. Yeah, it's great. I mean, the community there is great, and the snacks and the food there is great. So yeah, why wouldn't I be?
Absolutely. Free tea.
Yeah, indeed.
So why don't we just dive straight in and tell me a little bit about the kind of upbringing that you had and what was that like for you?
Yeah. So I wasn't raised in a Christian household, and so for me, the idea of God and of faith and of a kind of a greater vision and a greater hope didn't really concern me. I was just apathetic. I was someone that was just kind of focused on the now and the present. My mum would call herself some sort of Christian, someone perhaps a churchgoer, but she hadn't been for a while. I had church experience through years of my young years. We used to go to church, but I have no memory of that. And in primary school, there was church as well. Dad wouldn't describe himself as a Christian at all. He's probably got a bit of strife towards Christianity. So yeah, faith at home was never talked about. It wasn't actually until recently that I realised my mum had a Bible in the house the entire time. Through kind of secondary school, was more concerned with. I was a big fan of video games, but like genuinely just no interest in it whatsoever. That didn't even cross my mind at all.
Yeah. So then when was your first real exposure to God?
Yeah. So I remember it was the second year of college, and a friend of mine invited me to church. I was like, oh, okay. I suppose there's no harm in going. And it took me a few months to kind of build myself up, because I was like, what actually is church? What's going to happen there? I was trying to think back to my experience. All I remember is from primary school as a CVE, baptized CVE, at a Catholic church, not being able to partake in communion. So I was like, I hope I get the bread. But I spent a few months building myself up. I was extremely anxious around that stage, very introverted, very quiet, and it was probably in the new year of the second, so new calendar year, and I went. It was this crazy environment, It was me and my friend. We were the only youth there. Everyone else was over 50, 60. Weird experience, and I was basically trying to copy what people were doing. And it was a few weeks in, and I realized actually, if what they're saying is true, this changes everything. If they are saying that a man who lives 2,000 years ago lives perfectly, dies for the forgiveness of our sins, and then rises again, if that's true, then that's like the most valuable truth ever. If false, is the biggest lie in the world, and they've been deceived beyond belief. And so, I had all of these questions. I was like, well, I can't just kind of give up. I can't just be like, dismiss it and kind of move on again with life. The potential for truth in there is too great. And for me, knowing and encountering God wasn't something of a spiritual experience, more of a philosophical experience. I'm quite a skeptical person. I'm always questioning things, always filled with kind of doubts, and I always want to have kind of sound logic to my arguments. And I suppose I investigated and probed into the philosophy of theism, the belief in a God, and through kind of questioning and asking fellow Christians was really helpful. Particularly at university, as I joined university a few months later, I came in and I hadn't really had that Christian community. It was me, two friends from college, and effectively like 60, 70-year-olds. And I was like, I have so many questions. I don't know who to ask. But
so how long had you been going to church before you came to uni?
Probably 8 months or so.
Oh wow, okay, not long.
No, not long at all.
And would you have said that you'd made a commitment to Jesus before you came?
I don't know. This is something that I've been thinking about recently, actually. It's like, there was certainly a point where I was like, right, I'm going to drop everything and just go for it. But I certainly had a kind of keenness before that, that was mixed in with kind of sinful, worldly matters as well. So I don't know. But, coming into uni and having that Christian community and people that can answer your questions, hugely helpful. And it cleared up so many doubts and confusions. I was actually really anxious coming into uni because of the questions I had about the Christian faith. And I was like, why are so many people committed to this? Like, I don't know if it's true or not, but I kind of find myself enjoying the community of these people. And so really with all these questions, it's like, I've made some really good friends here. If these questions aren't answerable and I can't find any truth in it, then like, I'm gonna have to say goodbye to these friends. I was like, but what if? And then like struggles with kind of the big questions of like suffering and everything, and this kind of mental battle with it all. But I came into uni and asked lots of people different questions, and they provide some really, really good resources and answers. And I was like, oh wow, you can actually like rationalize a Christian worldview, and it actually really makes sense. That was really nice. I was like, oh, it actually works. So yeah, that's a brief overview.
Wow. Okay. Well,
I guess we can go into life before Christ.
Yeah.
I want to touch upon that. I remember in it's probably late secondary, maybe year 11, kind of 15-year-old, being introduced to porn. That was quite a big grasp on my life for a few years, kind of on and off. And I would describe myself as addicted to it. And that was very difficult. The kind of it, like for people that haven't experienced that, and like fantastic if you haven't, because can speak from experience, it's ghastly, it really is. But the grip that it takes on your life is insane. The kind of just the kind of temporary pleasure filled later with kind of unexplainable guilt and sorrow over your lust. It's vile, and that kept a grip on me for a good few years. So that was really difficult to deal with. I remember coming into college, and the environment was in Brighton, and that being where the Pride parades happen. My college was filled with that, kind of choosing your own self, doing what you want to do, being with who you want to be, if you wanted to go, and like kind of sexual liberation, and being like thrown that constantly each and every day was difficult. I never kind of felt myself kind of fall into the grasp of that, but I was certainly influenced by it. I remember towards as I was starting to go to church, lots of my friends around me were, kind of experimenting with their sexuality. A lot of them were saying, I kind of feel like I'm, say, bisexual, or I'm homosexual, or I'm this, or I'm that. And certainly I didn't feel that way. And I was like, is there something wrong with me? All of my friends here seem to have this kind of sexual experience within themselves that kind of seems to mean they can be with whoever they want. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's great. Be with whoever you want. Kind of, it's your choice. It's your body, right? Who am I to stop you? And I thought, but I'm missing that. And so I went over a period of questioning myself, and I kind of forced it upon myself. I was like, I must be right. Like everyone around me seems to be. I've got to be in some form. So I was really trying to force myself to have some sort of romantic connection with a man. And it was around the exam period of second year of college. And bearing in mind at this point, my friend had invited me to his youth group at church that I was going to each Friday. And so I was like reading the Bible. I was, understanding what this text has to say about matters, and then conflicting that against my own, I really want to be, bisexual. I really want to embrace myself in this community. But then, the claims of Christianity and what it asks of you conflicts with this. I came out, I said to some of my close friends, I said, well, I think I'm bisexual. I truly think that. And then later on, I told my parents. That was a huge struggle because I knew deep down that I wasn't trying to kind of embrace myself into that community and fit in. It was difficult.
Were you facing like rejection from the family, from the friends around you if you felt you didn't?
No, it wasn't so much rejection. It was more of a kind of can't get involved in like conversations and what happens. My friends were perfectly fine if that were to never happen. I was quite very introverted, not just quite, very introverted, and found myself, I suppose it's a lot really, becoming depressed as well. This is kind of a swirling cauldron of problems. But I was like, I've got to fit in. I've got to be able to, interact with these people, speak to them. Found myself identifying as bisexual amongst my family and my peers, and having huge kind of problems now with like, scripture says the opposite. It seems that if God is real, he's commanded me to a different life that doesn't involve, engaging in this. And again, washed upon with like doused with anxiety through that and struggles. And I'm like, but why is it wrong? Like, surely it's your truth, kind of your experience. It's you. And if you want to do that, like, who are you harming? And it's like, well, it's actually not quite about like your happiness, but rather your kind of holiness in that something I've come to realize now as a Christian, that actually, happiness, well, firstly through kind of sexual pleasure, is futile, but it's also not the ultimate purpose of life. Yeah.
So when you came to university, you hadn't figured all of that out?
No, I was, I was confused. I had questions on evidence. The resurrection seemed to be a big kind of thing that people would hammer on, death on a cross and resurrection. And I was like, well, that's ridiculous, right? Resurrection, that doesn't happen. Come on. Oh, so I get why they call it faith now, because they just believe. Oh, that makes sense. But hang on, some people are now, and then kind of I heard this idea of what's called apologetics, kind of defending the Christian faith with evidence, and I was like, what? And that kind of opened up a whole new sphere. And I questions about why is being, say, homosexual, so like why is that considered sinful? Like, it just doesn't make sense. I don't get it, and it seems cruel, and it seems that you're oppressing people, and it's like. But then again, it's like there's such a message of hope in there as well. Yeah. It's like the idea that you can come before God knowing that you've done wrong, and be able to freely speak to him, and he grants that in his mercy and love. I was like, I just can't give that up, you know. So there's such a tension between that great message of hope and like, wow, you know, being able to come into a relationship with the creator of the universe. I mean, the cosmos is vast, right? Absolutely. It's crazy. Have you seen those videos where it like zooms out of the universe and it's like, you know, Earth, solar system, you know, Milky Way, Andromeda, and it's like, it's vast, and it's like, I can engage with the mind behind this.
Yeah.
I just couldn't give it up.
But couldn't marry it with that oppression at the same time.
Yeah, what felt like oppression.
Yeah,
and certainly I know a lot of people that wouldn't call themselves Christians would see it as oppression.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of tension between the two ideas took some time to solve. Coming into uni, speaking to Christians about this, I was like, I just don't get it. Like, you know, the friend who invited me to church was going through the same issues, and she'd helped me a lot, and I've kind of felt indebted to her. I still do, and I was like, but like, why does it matter, right? What's the big deal? Like, why can't, you know, she, you know, go ahead and have a wife and kids, and why can't I go ahead and have a man? Like, I don't get it. Surely there's more to it. And then I was like, but resurrection, that doesn't happen. Like, you can't show that. Like, where's the evidence? Why is there suffering in the world? Why does it have to be 2,000 years ago? Why can't it be today? Why can't God just show up today?
Great questions.
You know, absolutely valid questions. Yeah. I really do appreciate it when people ask these questions.
Yeah.
I'd much rather people ask these questions than not. For me to not be able to question and probe things feels like I'm suffocating in a way. So for anyone listening, do ask questions and be open with fellow Christians.
So you're kind of stuck in this space of having all of these questions, but feeling like you cannot let go of the hope of Jesus.
Yes.
So what happened then? Because
so
I know you to be a faith-filled guy who still has lots of questions, but firmly believes in Jesus. So
so I went to a Bible study. There was a weekly Bible study that the Christian Union ran. One of the leaders, I said to him, I've got all of these questions. Like, can you point me to something? Can we talk about it? And he kind of pulled me aside and said, listen, I've got this book. I too went through the same thing. I had a period of questioning things and doubting, and I was looking particularly for evidence. And he said, you should read this book called Cold Case Christianity by J. Warner Wallace. It's this book on this American detective who would describe himself as an atheist. He looks into the claims of Christianity, and particularly the resurrection, and he looks into the evidence, and he actually says it's pretty sound. Like, there's, you know, not only potential for this to happen, but actually I think it did happen. And now he's a Christian, and he's been that for decades now, and speaks around America about evidence and, you know, the Gospels, which claim to be eyewitness testimony. Certainly the Gospel of John explicitly says that. Like, actually, you know, this could be legitimate. It seems to be that the way these four texts are written, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, seem to coalesce in a way that is credible of eyewitness testimony.
Yeah. Wow.
So
that was kind of one thing that made you go, oh yeah, this is actually,
like, you can legitimately defend this, and that, like, people like me who would have considered an atheist kind of rejecting of that have now come to know Christ. Okay, so the message being proclaimed of this man lived perfectly, died for the sins of the world, rose again, and now invites us to enjoy relationship with God as a community could be true. Sorry? Like, hang on, I thought I was living my life, you know, get a job, get, you know, family, have kids, retire, die, and that be it. What? There's more to it?
Yeah.
And you can defend that? So exciting. And I remember, must have been a few weeks later, looking on into the Bible, particularly a book called Ecclesiastes, a book that is very philosophically driven, a book that kind of thinks about life holistically, the idea of of kind of fleeting pleasures. The idea that like there's nothing really new in this life. It seems redundant. Like, what's the point? Like, if we're all gonna kind of, what's the point of trying to be a successful businessman, for example, to go on and die like everyone else? You know, the rich man and the poor man both end up in the graveyard. Like, what's the point? What's the point of trying to kind of be happy if that will end eventually? What's the point of trying to be sad if that will end eventually? Like, what's the point of doing anything? And it explores the idea of the futility of life, and actually realizing that life is not futile if one follows God and has a hope of more than just life. Certainly the Christian faith offers opportunity for life after death. And so, you know, the book concludes that actually everything in this world is effectively fleeting. Like, the author writes about kind of exploring life, kind of wealth, hugely rich person, sex, lots of wives, concubines, prostitutes, all of these things that people look for, work, academics. And he's like, well, they're all just fleeting and they all just go. I would really recommend anyone who has not read the book or is not familiar with it terribly to really probe it, and consider the words. The book of Ecclesiastes, found in the Old Testament, that book has changed my life, and I can confidently say that. I read the first chapter and I was like, oh, that's so true. Like, the idea that like, what am I doing with my life? What's the point of kind of coming to uni? And in my flat in first year was a flat that was filled with alcohol and drugs. I'd gone out clubbing with them a few times and had consumed a lot of alcohol, and I always came back feeling like, well, it's over now and I feel a bit rubbish, and I'm going to feel a bit rubbish the next morning. Like, what's the point? And then like a week later be like, right, let's keep going. Like, you know, the peer pressure, let's have a good time for the same thing to happen. That book describes that idea perfectly. It's like, you know, you've gone out trying to have a good time only to end up feeling rubbish by the end of it. Like, that desire was fleeting wherever you ended up now. Like, what are you doing with your life? One of the verses in chapter 1, verse 3, I won't quote it perfectly, but it says, what does man gain by all of his toil under the sun? Like, what do you actually gain when you put in effort to things? Sure, you can gain a job, but you'll lose that job eventually. Sure, you can gain money, but you'll lose that money eventually. Sure, you might have a family, but you'll lose that family eventually. And really kind of putting forth the prospects of life in an honest light, not just a positive light. And it's actually quite depressing.
It is. It's an incredibly depressing book.
It's very depressing, but it's full of wisdom and truth in that.
Absolutely. Like, everything is completely meaningless, but God.
Yeah, and the idea that God is eternal, that there's peace and stability that does not kind of falter with the weak. You know, there's constant peace, constant
He's the one that gives meaning to anything and everything, and without him it would all mean absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and you know, this isn't some kind of like Christian thing where it's like, oh, the Christians are just saying this because it makes them feel nice. If you think about this like logically, it makes sense. And the idea that, you know, if just for sake of argument, if there's no God, the philosophical concept of atheism, there's no God, then like, what are you doing in your life?
Yeah.
Like, you're just gonna live.
And why are you doing it?
Yeah, and why are you doing it? Like, what gives you the drive? Certainly, like, if you don't believe in spirituality, like, you know, what are you doing? Why are you working? What gives you that drive? Why should you enjoy these things? Bearing in mind you're all going to lose it one day. Like, you know, why do you care if people die early? Why do you try and prolong life? You all end up in the same place. Like, what's the point? But with God, who is, you know, offers you hope, offers you peace, is eternal, and can offer you life after death. Now this is different, because it's like the things that you work towards now have meaning. A great analogy is that the roads that we keep clean lead somewhere. It's the idea that your life is worth something, it's valuable because it's leading to somewhere. It's leading to what you know, some form of life after death. But the roads that we kind of forget about, that are desolate and decrepit, don't lead anywhere. So it's like, now your life has meaning. Work towards this and have a wise and good conduct.
Okay, so once you kind of discovered that, like what happened next?
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
how did that shape your relationship with God?
Yeah. So I read the book of Ecclesiastes. I put it down and I thought, I give up. I surrender. With God, there is, hope. There's that, oh, actually, life isn't fleeting. Life's not pointless. It leads somewhere. I might as well put in every effort that I can to really engage with this. It's the only thing that's worthwhile.
Yeah.
I put it down, and I haven't, I didn't engage in drunkenness. My flat went out clubbing and stuff like that. And I was always like, no. It's far more open about being a Christian as well. It's like, well, actually, if they're going to reject me, that's fine, because, the feelings of rejection will be fleeting as well. It's like, I might feel a bit rubbish, and it'd be difficult, but like, I'll just go, if they embrace me, again, just consider it, that would just go as well. And so, yeah, I was like, there's, I might as well serve God. Like, there's no other, what else is there really? Like, realistically,
No, yeah.
I can't, like, I try and see it from other people's perspectives, from speaking to non-Christians, and I just don't see it. Like, everything goes. Certainly people will forget about this podcast episode soon. It might bring you some hope, but without God, you're just gonna forget about it.
Yeah,
it's gonna just go one day.
So then when you made that decision that like God is the only thing that's worthwhile, what happened to all of those questions about, and like not being able to marry this oppression?
Yeah. Well, so certainly with the idea of like, well, like, it seems to be that you're not allowing, say, people who are not heterosexual to engage in some sort of relationship. I was like, yeah, but then again, it comes back, it all just comes back to the idea that it's fleeting. It's like, even if they do engage in that relationship, that's fleeting. Even if I were to engage in a relationship with a girl, even, or a guy, then that's fleeting. It's like, yeah, it might be difficult, but again, that difficulty is fleeting. I just give up. Like, what's the point of me trying to argue against this idea? The argument itself will be fleeting. Eventually, one day I'll forget about it. So why don't I just give myself to God? I've still got questions and I've still got doubts. I'm not saying that I'm set, but certainly give myself to God, trust that He will work through that, and He will remain faithful. And like, I can't really fail.
Yeah.
And
that's not to say that like there are things that are meaningless.
Yeah, so the idea of following God now illuminates meaning onto the things that once seem meaningless. Like, if kind of getting up every day and brushing my teeth, eating breakfast, whatever is meaningless. Well, it's not now, because I'm living my life for God.
Yeah. There's
an ultimate higher purpose that I'm living for. This motivates me to get up in the morning. It motivates me to pray, to read my Bible. Like, if there's a potential to know the creator of the universe, then why would I not engage in that?
Absolutely. And so like any relationship that you then, if you're looking at it through the lens of it's all for God, then everything that you do, every relationship you pursue is all for the honor and glory of the Lord.
Yes, indeed. And it gives meaning to the things that you do, because it's like, okay, fine, sure, your relationships might be fleeting in this life, but actually if you engage with your friends, if you can show them this great news of Jesus with them, then actually the time that you spend building them towards that, or even with other Christians, kind of building them up in the love of Christ, it doesn't become fleeting, because it actually leads somewhere, which is life after death, eternity with Christ. So actually prepare yourself for it.
Yeah.
It comes back to the idea that make sure your road is clean and is drivable, because it leads somewhere. Whereas without, like, where does your road lead without God? Really, it leads to the grave. So why care for it? But with God, it leads through the grave onto a new life.
Yeah.
So the idea of being holy that we mentioned, holiness, not happiness, holiness being kind of set apart, the idea of being different. He says that's actually quite difficult. It's narrow. Not many people will find it. There's a cost to it. but actually it leads to life. So the ultimate reward at the end of it is worth the cost now.
Absolutely.
It's like an investment, but the path that leads to death is wide, and many will go through it. The idea that you can engage in the world and engage in worldly pleasures, it's wide. Many people are doing it. I mean, look around. We live in 21st century Britain, and we've both been university students, and we live next to a university campus. It's very true. But again, the idea that actually, what is that leading to? But the grave.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow. What does your life look like now?
Life's very different.
Mm-hmm.
On the outside, life might seem, the same. Like what's happened, you're still at university, you're still doing your course.
And you're only in second year, right?
Second
This has all happened.
This is
within
quite
the last,
recent.
2 years of your life.
2 years-ish.
Yeah.
Granted, it was probably around, just 2 years ago that I first went to church, and so it's all quite new still. Life on the outside might look the same. The kingdom that Jesus outlines certainly very clearly in the book of Matthew, chapters 5-7. He outlines principles for this kingdom. Kingdom he brings forth is a kingdom of love for your neighbor, love for God, a kingdom of serving, a kingdom of humility, a kingdom of sacrifice, a kingdom of understanding, a kingdom of complete self-sacrifice, not looking towards yourself, but looking to others, a recognition of your own failings and your need for God, your deep, deep need for God. And that's the difference that Christ brings, actually realizing that there is a community of people that can serve you, that you can serve, that you grow together, that you journey together, you live your life for God and for others, not for yourself. Completely kind of contradicts the idea that certainly our society puts forth. The idea that you can enjoy fellowship, deep fellowship with these people through prayer, through being vulnerable. Certainly the greatest idea that you can enjoy communion as a group of people with God. And the peace that brings and the hope that brings is phenomenal. I really can testify to it. I remember getting quite stressed over exam periods, and I used to be very studious and very hardworking.
But you're not anymore. Is that what you're getting at?
No, I am hardworking, but I'm not stressed. I really am not.
Yeah.
I really can honestly, with all my heart, testify to the fact that I haven't been stressed in ages. That I'm filled with peace and a great joy that doesn't manifest itself in happiness, a joy that is there's a security in knowing Christ, knowing all of my wrongdoings are forgiven, that I'm held firmly within the arms of God, and that I can come in with people and enjoy this truth together and share it with others. It's life-changing. It really is phenomenal. And your kind of motivation, your attitudes towards things change completely. Like you actually now care, realize that, oh my goodness, say for my university course, I could be doing this for God. I could be working hard for God. I could be using the resources I have, not for myself, but for others. I could be devoting my time, not to myself, but to others. And actually people might think, but like, what do you get out of that? But like, they've missed the point. And the great thing about Christ is that he brings you that motivation to do that. You actually have a sense of great joy in working for others. You have a sense of great joy about working for God. That Christ offers, truly does offer. And I can strongly testify to that. So those are the subjective differences. Objectively, and kind of more fact-based, we can touch upon it as well. But the idea that actually the claims of Christianity are true, you can't like really avoid that. The idea that a man called Jesus lived perfectly, died on a cross, claiming that this death would forgive you of all your wrongdoing, and then rise 3 days later. Those are facts. Certainly his living, dying and rising again, those are facts of history. So it's like you can't really avoid that. Even if you don't want to respond to that and participate in with Christ. You can't really avoid them as facts of history.
And if somebody wanted to find evidence,
Yeah.
like where did you look? Where would you point?
Yeah,
them
finding
towards?
evidence. So there's loads of different ways of doing that. The book I mentioned earlier, Cold Case Christianity, is a great one. There's A Verdict That Demands Evidence by Josh McDowell, I think, off the top of my head. That's another one. It's great stuff on YouTube as well. There's a man called William Lane Craig, who's a Christian philosopher, an apologist. Again, he's got great arguments for the existence of God, for the resurrection of Christ. Loads of different people. There's so many great resources out there that talk about the resurrection and why it's a thing. And some people might be like, well, it's not like set in stone. Like, people are debating this all the time, and it's like, yeah, that's true. People, debate it, and some people say there's insufficient evidence. Some people debate on, what actually happened. Was there an empty tomb? Some people say no. Some people say yes. But I think everyone across the board can appreciate a few facts that Jesus really did exist. He really did die on a cross. A few days later, followers of his claimed to have seen him risen from the dead. Then this appeared amongst multiple people, not just one or two people, but lots of people. That women were the first people to see him, which is really important actually, because people can be like, wow, does that matter? But that's important. And that they were then going to spend the next 4 decades, their life. I mean, some of you listening might not even be 40 yet. Yeah. I'm 19, so that's not even half of my life. The next two lots of my life that I've lived so far, being like tortured and martyred and beaten and mocked, and spreading this from Jerusalem in Israel all the way to the Roman Empire, to Egypt, to India. Spent the next 40 years doing that without once denying it.
Yeah. Which you'd have to be so convinced.
Yeah.
Surely, like, if it wasn't true, and if they didn't firmly believe that they had seen Jesus risen from the dead, then during all of that torture, at least one of them was going to crack. Right?
A great example is the Watergate scandal. So the Watergate scandal was a scandal in the 1970s. I don't actually know the exact details, but it involved President Nixon's presidency, and I can't remember the exact details of the scandal. But anyway, there were three men involved that knew they were lying about something that was quite important and governmental, and they were faced with X amount of years in prison, and within weeks they cracked. These are men in high-ranking positions who can afford strong lawyers to defend their case, and now change the case to first century Jewish men, of fishermen to tax collectors, hated by the Jewish community, enemies of the Jews, siding with the Romans who were oppressing the Jews, who then spend the next 40 years of their life being beaten, mocked, tortured, knowing that they will die. They're very confident in this. They will die for this, and they're fully aware of that from the outset. Who rejoice in their sufferings as well, who are actually happy to suffer for this cause, because they truly do believe that a man has risen from the dead. And when they're going through this, if they renounce the fact that Jesus did not rise, they wouldn't have to go through this. They could be set free from this intense suffering.
There's that verse that says, if the Spirit, I'm paraphrasing, but it's like, if the Spirit is in you, you cannot deny that Jesus is Lord. Their beings couldn't do it. They couldn't say it because the Spirit was fully in them. And so you have to conclude from the historical facts they truly did think Jesus rose. They truly did think they interacted with the risen Christ. And so people would be like, okay, great, they thought that. Well, what if? And then there's so many different theories that people throw around. They were lying, that Jesus didn't die, that they were hallucinating. Go through all the list. I can quickly tell you why for some of them. The list goes on really. But let's say they were lying. It's like, well, people don't do that for a lie. Yep. Right. If you think that your friend, your leader, has risen from the dead,
and that you are unsure of. If you know that your friend has died and hasn't risen from the dead, but you want to proclaim this message by kind of coming together and lying, would you then go through 40 years of torture for a lie? Like, what does that bring you?
What are you
What are you doing?
Yeah.
And the Watergate scandal was used because these men knew they were lying and cracked under a bit of pressure. Actually, I think one of them did become a Christian as well, because he looked into the resurrection. He's like, I've experienced that. And these men who spend the next 40 years of their life going through insane sufferings for this,
awesome,
did not give up. I gave up after like a few weeks.
Yeah.
They cannot be lying. So it's fair to say that they probably weren't lying. In fact, probably is not good. They weren't lying. Some people say, well, maybe they hallucinated. One idea that floats around is that Peter had a vision of Jesus. Peter denies knowing Jesus before his crucifixion, otherwise he'll be killed. And some people say, well, he must have been kind of guilt-ridden and had a vision. And the reason I reject that is because the appearances of Jesus were grouped. They were with multiple people, and it's very, very unlikely to have multiple hallucinations of the exact same thing.
Yeah, how is that going to work?
Right, you don't really get that. You might... Some people might have vaguely similar experiences, but they all testify to the exact same thing, that we saw, ate, interacted with, touched Jesus, and he spoke to us, saying the same words. Again, it's very unlikely that they're hallucinating. That doesn't really happen. They say, well, why doesn't Jesus die?
And it happened multiple times, right?
Yeah, it didn't happen once, actually. That's a very good point. There's multiple attestations of Jesus.
Across like 40 days.
Yeah. A great another example, not even that, but the Apostle Paul as well. So Paul is a Pharisee, which is kind of a respected Jewish religious leader, highly, highly wealthy man, educated man. And upon hearing about this new sect, I'll call it, this kind of Jesus movement, is infuriated by it, and he spends the next 2 years persecuting Christians. He's filled with kind of venomous rage, and that's his life. He wants to kill them. He wants to throw them into prison. He wants to get it eliminated. He hates it. Imagine. I can't really compare his kind of rage against the followers of Jesus in the first century. It's hard to really put it in terms of some sort of like in modern standards. I don't really know how to compare it.
Is it too far to say Hitler?
Possibly, legitimately, he has a venomous rage against these people.
Yeah.
Certainly not to the extent of kind of 20th century dictators, but he does everything in his power to do so.
He wants to kill them. Yeah,
he wants to eliminate
it.
He even writes himself in some of his letters. I can't remember the exact wording, but he says like, I was like the Hebrews of Hebrews, tribe of Benjamin. He exalts in his great status. Look at me. Yeah. Look at these people. They're misleading people, and they're completely ruining the Jewish faith, and people are following them. But he then on the road to Damascus. So Damascus is the city that he's going to, and he's actually going there to meet with, I believe, he's probably going to meet with fellow Jewish leaders to plot to continue to kill these people. He claims to have seen Jesus. He claims to have received the revelation that Jesus came to him and spoke to him, and has commissioned him to repent, to stop his old ways, to stop persecuting him. Jesus says to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Saul being his Jewish name, Paul being his Roman name. Not why do you persecute my followers, why do you persecute me? The idea that the followers of Jesus make up kind of a body of Jesus. And Paul doesn't really know what to do. And so he stops and he drops it. He actually goes to a fellow Christian to kind of be reconciled on this, and from then on he spends the next 40 years of his life traveling the world. He makes it from Jerusalem to Rome. You can read about it in the history books. Really, he's imprisoned, tortured, beaten, left for dead, stoned, struck. So Jesus claims there's appearance of Jesus after his death. And then there's also like Paul, this man who hates Jesus, who's not connected to this group in any form, who hates Jesus and suddenly starts following him. The only reasonable thing to conclude is that he really did think he was seeing Jesus. Yeah. Right? Again, that's very odd. Even if you don't want to say he rose, that's extremely odd.
And to have like be it's such an intense encounter
Yeah,
to
yeah.
drop everything that you believe and completely turn and be one with Christ and honor his body and become part of his body, who you were just trying to kill.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, complete transformation.
Yeah. I mean, for anyone that's listening, think of something that you desperately hate, and then dropping everything and spending the rest of your life, working with that cause, and in going through intense sufferings. I don't think you can imagine it.
No, something drastic would have to happen to you.
Right,
Yeah.
And so the only reasonable thing to conclude is he really did think he was seeing Jesus, and Jesus, he really thought he was speaking to him. And what people say, well, that was like a hallucination or whatever, and it's like, if that was a hallucination, that's pretty intense.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of it, like really intense hallucinations in which someone drops everything, does a humongous 180.
And he was Jesus blinded him, didn't he?
Yes, yeah, and then he
to come away from it blind.
Yeah, he's left blind. I fail to see how you can account for that, unless he really did see Jesus. And if he saw Jesus after Jesus had died, that there's got to be some sort of resurrection of Jesus. Certainly in the case of Paul, it's more of a spiritual experience. There's no physical encounter, but you can, with the other disciples, Peter, John, Andrew, James, they certainly claim to have physical interactions.
Yeah.
That they're willing to give up their lives utterly and rejoice in the hardships and suffering they go through.
Yeah. I want to move on, but I also quickly want to touch on I love Thomas, because one of the things I love about Thomas is that he's known as Doubting Thomas.
Yes.
If you're not a Christian and you're listening, you might know him as Doubting Thomas. Like, he's basically the one that all of the disciples saw Jesus. Jesus appeared to them all, apart from Thomas, after he rose from the grave. And Thomas was basically like, unless I see him in front of me and I touch the scars, and I will not believe. And Jesus, in his mercy and his goodness, was like, okay, I'll come then.
Yeah.
But what I love about that is that, first of all, it's so unfair that Thomas is called Doubting Thomas, because previously in the Gospels, he is literally like, all or nothing, go for it, Thomas. He is so completely sold out for Jesus. And people are like, I think there's one point where some of the disciples are like, Jesus says, we're going to go back to this place. And the disciples are like, no, we can't go there because they'll kill you. And Thomas is like, let's go, Jesus, I'll back you. I'm all for it. Let's go. So he's like so faithful. And what I love about the fact that he doubts, he does doubt, because he says, I won't believe unless Jesus appears to me. But what he's saying in that moment is, you guys saw him. That's not fair. I want to be just as good an apostle as you guys. I want to have a first-hand account. I want to be able to go and tell people that I saw him firsthand and not doubt that. Which is a completely fair thing to ask for, I think. And Jesus, in his goodness and his mercy, does what Thomas asks.
Yeah. That story's great. I think the disciple I identify most with is Doubting Thomas. And that story highlights two great things. One, the idea that, like, certainly for a lot of Christians, the idea of doubt, they think, I'm being a bad Christian, I shouldn't be doubting, I should just hold firm. There's great mercy, and Christ doesn't reject you because of that doubt. And Doubting Thomas is a great example. But also the idea that actually, the disciples weren't just like, let's just believe it and just kind of like, no, Thomas wants to see it. He's like, I refuse to accept this. I want to see the evidence. I want to see what you guys have seen. Again, he's not blindly accepting it as well, which I think a lot of people who look at Christians think, they're just blindly accepting it. They've just been raised this way. It's just something they do. Again, not true. I can't say that for all Christians, but I can certainly say that for myself. It's good to have questions. Yeah, absolutely. It's not about doubting as such. It's about, like, yes, you might have questions, but your faith overrides those questions. Yeah. There's a sure found assurance again, which hinges in the resurrection. It's the idea that like if Jesus did rise, then the claims that he makes about me and about others and about how he relates to all of us kind of have to be true.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, I've still got doubts, I've still got questions, but I know that Jesus rose and that I am secure in him.
Yeah. And so all of those things come
so
secondary.
I can continue to pursue that.
Yeah.
There's a great confidence in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like something that I keep thinking about as we're talking is you mention a few times this deep fellowship that you have stepped into as part of the body of Christ.
Yeah.
Like, how was that experience for you? How's it been in the last year at uni since making that decision? Like, I'm following Jesus, and then like stepping into being part of his body.
Yeah.
What are those relationships like that you have with other Christians? And tell me about that a bit.
Yeah. Before I talk about my experience, I'll talk about the experience of others. I know a lot of people who have experienced what they might refer to as church hurt. The idea that like, oh, well, I used to go to church, but everyone was like mean, they were rejecting.
Yeah.
This is not the experience that I've had, but I know it has been the experience of people in the past.
Yeah, it's the reality in lots of places.
Yes, it's very true. We don't, deny that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
The church is not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I would, it's the idea that the church comes together for healing, which implies that it's broken, and they seek Christ for healing. So my experience, I can honestly say that the people that I've met through church, through the Christian Union, very, very quickly became my closest friends.
Yeah.
Very, very quickly became people who I could be very vulnerable with. There was no fear of judgment from them. It was like, guys, I'm struggling with this issue, or guys, I've done this, or guys, I've done that. And they would draw with me, and they too would share in their own struggles, and we could pray for each other, build each other up, correct each other in our ways, and recognize that these things are wrong, but there's also offer of forgiveness, and grace and mercy, and the idea that we band together for a common goal, which is to certainly within the Christian Union, to share the good news of Jesus on the campus by following the commands of Jesus, by trying to honor him. You honor other people, and the great blessings is insane.
Do you have any specific stories based on that you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. So I remember in first year, I really didn't like calls, and as the year went on, I was discontent in halls. I was not very sociable with my flat. Certainly in the second and third terms of first year, and there was two great friends of mine who were in the year above, and they lived in a house, and their door for me was completely wide open, that I was able to enter and spend time there at any point. They would cook for me, I would cook for them. I'd get on with their house chores as well, clean the house, enjoy company and fellowship together, spending time together, being honest with each other, having some great laughs, and some great sharing and some great sorrows. The idea that I could come whenever, the door was open always. Like, I didn't have to have a reason for it. It seems to be quite a big thing in British culture. You've got to have a reason for going somewhere. But I could walk on in, and they would gladly accept me. Was hugely helpful. So that's got to be the one that's at the forefront of my mind when someone asks about kind of Christian fellowship. Great example recently was I was feeling particularly tired on a Sunday morning after church, and a friend's house was nearby, and I knocked on the door, and a friend opened, and I said, I'm really tired. And they said, would you like just to nap on our sofa? I was like, yes, please. It's very simple. I suppose certainly for me, the great joy is the simplicity of it. Yeah. That we can enjoy company together, but deep company. We can speak about, we don't have to try and awkwardly engage in kind of small talk and work out what to talk about, but actually there's a common goal to us, which is Jesus. Yeah. That we can engage in speaking about Jesus. We can engage in our growth and our our walk with him, our struggles. We can enjoy prayer together, which bonds people marvelously. We can enjoy food together. We can just get on with life together. We can help each other and serve each other, and care deeply for each other, sacrifice our time for others. That, like, I just don't really know what to say apart from that. Like, that's good. Just marvelous.
Yeah, it is. And with God, it has all the meaning in the world.
Right, goes back to it. It's like, well, Luke, didn't you say everything's fleeting? Unless, it leads somewhere.
Yeah.
And it does. And that fellowship builds you up,
mm-hmm.
and it grows you closer to Christ, which ultimately leads to eternity with him.
We've been talking for such a long time,
Yeah.
so we need to wrap up. But is there anything else that you'd like to, any final story or something you'd like to share before?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about, like, to the listener. They might think, this person, their life seems so sorted, like everything seems going really well for them. Again, that's not true. We were discussing earlier that yes, life is not like perfect. There's still struggles, there's still everything, but the kind of hope and faith in God supersedes that.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, my life's not perfect, but I've put value and I've committed myself to something greater, and that's the motivation through things. I still certainly have doubts. I'm as I say, I'm quite a skeptical guy. I'm someone that's like logic and evidence and all of that, and I've still got questions about the Bible, so I'm not sorted either.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a confidence in three things, which is that one, God exists.
No doubt about that.
No doubt about that. That
mm-hmm.
there has to be a creator of this universe
mm-hmm.
in some form. That has to be personal, and I mean, I could spend hours talking about why that's the case. Two, that someone called Jesus did live, did die, and did rise again.
Mm-hmm.
Again, very confident on that. And that three, this person called Jesus is the Lord of my life. Those three things I'm absolutely confident on. Those three things are a firm, like a solid rock in my life. So with these three things, this means that I can pursue knowing Christ, engaging in Christian community continually, while still having questions and doubts. These three things I know are true, and so that continues to motivate me forth in this walk with Christ.
Awesome. That's so good. Well, thank you so much, Luke, for coming and chatting to me.
Well, it has been a pleasure.
It has been. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Very different to a classic podcast episode.
It is.
Ours.
Yeah, I've certainly got a unique case, but in a way that's a good thing.
Absolutely, it is. It will speak to those that
feel this way. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for listening. And if you want to get in touch with Luke, then please, you can contact me.
Yes. I'd love to speak to whoever.
Yeah.
And
I can put you in contact with Luke.
Yes, absolutely.
So you can message us on our Instagram at stumblingtoeternity in order to do that. Or you can email stumblingtoeternity@gmail.com and I can put you in touch with Luke.
Great. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.